We all use radios every day, right? I mean, from our phones to our cars, it's hard to imagine life without them. But before Bluetooth, before Wi-Fi, heck, even before radio broadcasts, there was Marconi and his wireless telegraph.
Truly revolutionary.
Absolutely right.
Yeah, we're talking about sending signals through thin air, something that seemed like magic at the time.
Pure magic.
Yeah, so today we're diving into his 1901 patent, the one that really set the stage for the wireless world we know today.
Okay, so let's unpack this thing. The patent describes his system in such detail, it's like we're looking over his shoulder in the lab. So he starts with this thing called a Ruhmkorff coil. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the Ruhmkorff coil is essential because it generates these incredibly high voltage sparks, and you need that powerful jolt of energy to create radio waves.
Okay.
It's based on the idea that a rapidly changing electric current, like the one produced by a spark, can create a ripple in the electromagnetic field, and that's your radio wave.
So those sparks are like the genesis of the signal, and then he connects this coil to these large metal plates. It's like he's building giant antennas, even talking about using balloons to lift them higher. So what's the thinking there?
Those plates are key to transmitting that signal effectively.
Okay.
The size and spacing of those plates directly affect the wavelength of the radio waves produced. So by carefully tuning those dimensions, Marconi could control the wavelength and ensure it was optimal for long-distance transmission. Think of it like tuning a musical instrument. You know you need the right frequency to get a clear, strong sound.
So it's not just about sending out any old spark. It's about fine-tuning those sparks into a specific type of wave. Then on the receiving end, he uses something he calls a sensitive tube, what we now call a coherer. And it's this small tube filled with, get this, metallic filings.
Yeah.
That seems so simple for such a complex task.
It is simple, but that simplicity is part of its brilliance. You see, those metallic filings are normally very resistant to electrical current, but when a radio wave hits that tube, something amazing happens. The filings actually clump together, and the resistance drops dramatically, and suddenly they become a pathway for electricity to flow.
Oh.
It's like flipping a switch, and that's how Marconi's receiver knows that a signal has arrived.
Wow. And he's very specific about those filings, even listing the exact recipe. Nickel, silver, a touch of mercury. Why all the fuss over seemingly simple metal dust?
It's all about sensitivity. Marconi was dealing with very weak signals traveling vast distances, so those specific metals, especially that tiny bit of mercury, made the filings incredibly responsive to even the faintest radio waves. Think of it like adding a supercharger to your receiver, allowing it to pick up whispers from across the ocean.
Okay, so we've got the spark creating the waves, the plates tuning them, and this sensitive tube detecting them. But I notice he also talks about the importance of minimizing something called self-induction. What's that all about?
Self-induction is a bit like electrical inertia. It can create interference within the circuit itself, making it difficult for the sensitive tube to do its job.
Okay.
Marconi was very clever in minimizing this interference by carefully designing the circuit and using components like choking coils. These coils act like filters, blocking out unwanted electrical noise and ensuring the delicate signal from the coherer gets through loud and clear.
So he's essentially cleaning up the signal at both ends, making sure the transmission is as clear as possible. But remember, the filings in that sensitive tube clump together when they receive a signal. So how did he solve that problem? Otherwise, he would only be able to receive one message.
Well, that was another challenge, and Marconi's solution is both ingenious and wonderfully mechanical. He actually used a vibrating hammer, like a tiny electric bell, to tap the tube and shake those filings loose after each signal. It's like hitting the reset button, ensuring the tube is ready to receive the next transmission.
That's a very clever workaround. And it makes me realize just how much ingenuity went into every aspect of this system. And, he didn't stop there. He also realized he needed to shield the transmitter and receiver from each other to prevent interference. And that's a concept still used in wireless technology today.
Right. Absolutely. Marconi understood that even though the radio waves were designed to travel a certain distance, some of that energy could still leak back and disrupt the receiver. So, by carefully shielding both units, he ensured a clear path for the intended signal. He really was thinking about every possible detail.
So to recap, we have the transmitter sending out these fine-tuned radio waves, and the receiver using that incredibly sensitive tube to detect them, and, thanks to the vibrating hammer, ready to pick up the next one. It's remarkable how this seemingly simple system revolutionized communication. But how did this actually translate into sending and receiving messages?
That's where things get even more fascinating. You know, Marconi didn't just create a way to send signals. He developed a whole system for encoding information into those signals. And that, my friend, is where the true magic of the wireless telegraph lies.
Well, then let's delve into that magic, shall we?
When you dive into the details of this patent, it's Marconi's emphasis on electrical tuning that really stands out.
Yeah.
He wasn't just blasting out radio waves, he was carefully controlling their wavelength to make sure they reached their destination.
That makes sense. I remember him talking about, the importance of matching the wavelength of the transmitter and receiver. But how did he actually figure out what that optimal wavelength was? It's not like he had some fancy measuring device back then.
Right, he had to get creative. He describes this ingenious little tool he calls a detector.
Okay.
Basically, a strip of tinfoil with a small gap in it attached to a glass plate. He would hold this detector near the transmitter and watch for sparks jumping across the gap in the tinfoil.
Wait, so he was essentially using tiny lightning bolts to fine-tune his system. That's incredible.
Yeah.
But how did that tell him anything about the wavelength?
It all comes down to resonance. Think of it like pushing a swing. If you push it just the right moment, matching the swing's natural rhythm, you can get it going really high with very little effort.
Well,
Same principle applies here. When the length of the tinfoil strip matched the wavelength of the radio waves, it would resonate, and the sparks across the gap would be the strongest. It's a beautifully simple way to visualize an invisible phenomenon.
so he was literally tuning his system by eye, watching for the biggest sparks. I never would have thought of that. And once he found that sweet spot, he could adjust the size of those big metal plates to make sure the transmitter was sending out waves of the correct length.
Right. Exactly. And he also had to make sure the receiving circuit was tuned to that same wavelength. Remember those metallic filings in the coherer? Well, the size and spacing of those filings also played a role in determining which wavelengths it was most sensitive to. It was all about getting everything in sync, like a perfectly tuned orchestra.
It's amazing how much thought went into every little detail. And speaking of details, he mentions using multiple smaller spark gaps instead of one big one when dealing with really powerful coils. Why was that?
That's another example of Marconi's clever engineering. Imagine trying to control a single massive bolt of lightning. It would be chaotic and unpredictable.
Yeah.
So by using multiple smaller gaps, he could distribute that electrical stress more evenly, making the sparks more regular and controlled. It's like building a bridge with multiple smaller supports instead of one giant pillar. It's more stable and reliable.
So it's not just about brute force, it's about finesse and control. I also notice he talks about a revolving contact on the Ruhmkorff coil to improve the regularity of the spark. It seems like he was constantly tinkering, trying to optimize every single element.
That's the hallmark of a true innovator,
Yeah.
that relentless pursuit of perfection. He wasn't satisfied with just making it work. He wanted to make it work flawlessly as possible. Every little adjustment, every refinement contributed to making the wireless telegraph more reliable and efficient.
And all of this meticulous attention to detail was absolutely necessary, especially when you consider the delicate nature of that sensitive tube. I mean, he's incredibly specific about how those metallic filings need to be prepared.
Absolutely. It's fascinating how something seemingly insignificant like the size and cleanliness of those filings could make or break the entire system. He talks about making sure they're not too fine, free of any grease or dirt, loose enough to move freely within the tube. Remember, those filings were the heart of the receiver. Their sensitivity determined whether a signal was detected or missed entirely.
He even mentions sealing the tubes with a hydrogen and air flame, being careful not to overheat them in the process. It's like he's giving us a master class in scientific precision.
And remember, this was all happening in an era before sophisticated lab equipment.
Yeah.
Marconi was pushing the boundaries of science with the tools and knowledge available at the time. It's a testament to his ingenuity and meticulous experimentation.
And speaking of experimentation, he wasn't content with just one method for decohering the sensitive tube. Besides that vibrating hammer, he also describes using an electromagnet to move one of the stops inside the tube, gently shaking those filings loose. Why the need for multiple approaches?
Shows his commitment to exploring every possible avenue for improvement. Perhaps the hammer wasn't ideal in certain situations, or maybe he was looking for a more elegant solution.
Right.
Either way, it highlights his constant drive to refine and optimize his invention.
It's clear that Marconi was not only a brilliant scientist, but also a relentless tinkerer. He took these theoretical concepts and turned them into a working reality through sheer determination and a keen eye for detail.
His dedication paid off.
Hmm.
By mastering the art of electrical tuning, he transformed this seemingly magical phenomenon of radio waves into a reliable and practical means of communication. But the story doesn't end there. The real impact of Marconi's invention lies in how it changed the world.
That's what I'm really curious about. How did this invention, this ability to send messages through thin air, actually affect people's lives?
Yeah.
What were the implications of this groundbreaking technology?
Well, that's where things get really interesting.
So we've talked about the nuts and bolts, the sparks and the filings, the ingenious ways Marconi made this system work. But what I really want to understand is the impact. How did this invention change the world?
Well, think about it. This was a time when communication was limited by, physical wires. If you wanted to send a message across the ocean, you had to wait for a ship to deliver it,
Right.
which could take weeks or even months.
It's hard to grasp just how revolutionary that must have felt. Suddenly, ships at sea could stay in contact with the shore, reporting weather conditions, requesting assistance, or simply staying in touch with loved ones. It must have seemed like magic.
It was a paradigm shift. Imagine the impact on exploration, navigation, rescue operations.
Wow.
The ability to communicate wirelessly opened up entirely new possibilities, making the world feel smaller and more connected.
And it wasn't just practical applications, was it? There must have been a sense of wonder and awe surrounding this technology. Sending messages through the air, invisible waves carrying voices and information across vast distances. It must have captured people's imaginations.
Absolutely. It sparked a wave of excitement about the future of technology and what might be possible. Newspapers and magazines were filled with stories about Marconi's invention, and people flocked to demonstrations to witness this marvel with their own eyes. It was a true cultural phenomenon.
It's incredible to think that this one invention, born out of Marconi's tireless tinkering and scientific curiosity, laid the foundation for so much of what we take for granted today. From radio broadcasts to Wi-Fi, it all traces back to those early experiments with spark gaps and sensitive tubes.
It really does make you appreciate the power of human ingenuity. And while Marconi's original system may seem simple by today's standards, the principles he pioneered are still at the heart of modern wireless technology. Those ideas of electrical tuning, signal amplification, and interference mitigation continue to shape the way we communicate and interact with the world around us.
So as we walk around with our smartphones, stream music wirelessly, and connect with people across the globe in an instant, we owe a debt of gratitude to Guglielmo Marconi. His spark of genius ignited a revolution that continues to shape our world today.
And as we move further into an increasingly wireless future, it's worth reflecting on Marconi's legacy. Who knows what other groundbreaking applications of these principles are still waiting to be discovered? The journey of innovation never truly ends.
Absolutely. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next time with another fascinating look into the world of technology and innovation.